Solving a system of equations using the addition-elimination method is a nice technique to use when you have equations where both the x variable and the y variable are on one side equals your constant. So this is what's called standard form, and as long as you keep all of the same variables lined up in columns on the same side of the equal sign, you can use this technique. So your goal is exactly what the method says. We are trying to add these two equations together to be able to eliminate one of the variables. So when you look at the variables x and y, you want to look to see if we were to add these together, would one of the variables eliminate? Meaning one of the variables needs to be the exact opposites of each other. So your goal is to first look to see if you can find one of the variables which are exact opposites. And in this case, y is the exact opposite. If that occurs, you don't need to do any kind of changing or modifications of these equations. You're simply going to do the technique of adding to eliminate. And when I add vertically, I'm allowed to combine my like terms, which gives me 2x. The y's are going to cancel, equals 6. And so now I've added my two equations together and eliminated the y. And now when I divide by 2, I have solved for x. So in my solution for my system, the value that makes both of these equations true so far is when x is 3. Now you simply need to pick one of the equations and substitute. Doesn't matter which one you choose, since this is going to be a solution to both. Just pick one, whichever looks easiest, and solve for y. And in this case, when I subtract 3 from both sides, y is 2. So your solution to this equation is the ordered pair 3, 2. Now again, remember, it is possible to have fractions, decimals, but in this case, we end up with integer values. And this is your addition-elimination process. Now, sometimes you end up with a system where it looks almost like you should be able to add them, but not exactly. So let's get a new system here. 2x plus 3y equals 8. And let's go with x plus 3y equals 7. Now notice on this system that if I were to try and add my equations together, that neither the x or the y variable is going to cancel. However, these two terms are almost what I need them to be. So if I could make one of those equations the exact opposite, like this one, it would be really helpful to us. So even though it's called the addition-elimination method, addition of or subtraction is also called adding negatives. So what I can do is I can either think of, I'm going to multiply every single one of these terms by a -1, or I can think to subtract, because that's the same as adding a negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change my sign on every single one of these terms. And I'm allowed to change the sign on every term because in reality I'm really looking at taking the equation x plus 3y equals 7, and I'm really multiplying the whole thing by a -1. And when I multiply the whole thing by a -1, that distributing of the negative is what allows me to change the sign on every term. So again, as long as you've done this to every term, you're okay. All right, you can't just change just this one term. All right, and so now I can add. And again, 2 minus 1 gives me an x. My y terms cancel, and 8 minus 7 is a -1. And so by simply just subtracting my two equations, I have found the value for x. Now again, it doesn't matter which you plug into. Pick any equation that you like. You can pick the original, what this was before I multiplied by a negative or before I subtracted, or I can pick this one up here. I'm going to choose to pick this, what this one looks like before I put the negative inside. And so for that, when x is 1, the remainder of my equation is 3y equals 7. And so now I'm going to solve for y. So again, subtract 1. And a lot of times we do this mentally. We tend to not write that we're adding or subtracting, just like if I divide both sides by 3, y is 2. So if you want to skip kind of this step of subtracting, writing it down, you can do it mentally. I'm okay with that, as long as you don't skip all of it and do both steps in your head. So x is 1 and y is 2.